Just hours ago, Fujifilm just launched the latest camera. And on my hand here is a sample. This is a pre-production sample itself. So whatever I say in this review may not be the final, outcome of this camera itself. I'm Richard and welcome to ZP Productions. On my hand here is a GFX50S version 2 and the 35-70 f4.5 to f5.6 zoom lens, compact zoom lens if you ask me. Now this is an early production sample, so this is not the final hardware and software and firmware that should come with the camera itself, so maybe there are some changes, but I was told that this should be very representative of what is to come. Now this camera, I would say, as it is a very modernized version of the GFX50S, which is also my first GFX camera. And literally, if you have owned the GFX100S, seen one before, or if you have seen any review before, essentially the GFX50S is the same body, everything down to the buttons, the controls, except now they fixed some of the weird quirks that I had in the early GFX100S sample. And pretty much, they gave a modern version of the GFX50S. And you may be wondering, what's the difference between the GFX50S and the GFX50S version 2? Now, I'll split this review to two parts. Firstly, I will talk about the camera. Then I will talk about the lens, 35-70 f4.5 to f5.6 zoom lens. This is an interesting lens. I'll talk about it. But let's talk about the camera first. I mean, this is pretty much the most exciting part of this whole preview itself. Now, the GFX50S version 2, literally, as I said, GFX100S body, except that, they fixed the quirky thumb. When I was playing with this camera, I did not have this issue of the quirky thumb stick that doesn't respond to me. It seems to be responding really well now. I just press and it moves off, so I think they fixed the quirky thumb. Or maybe it's already fixed in the 100S production version, which I have yet to test one. And the thing is the same as what I have said in the GFX100S. In fact, if you have not taken a look at the review, take a look at the review here because the body is essentially the same. It's just that the buttons are quite little. If you preset your camera up well, I think that will be okay. But if you're the type who will have a lot of buttons, white balance, color profile, then on and off, the exposure, and then all the various settings, AF lock, AE lock, everything you want a separate button, this camera does have a little lacking of button considering the size of the camera itself. I wish they had brought back the direction, four-way direction buttons here, and that give me enough 4 more buttons to at least put my white balance and color profile and probably some additional settings. But then again, no worries here. There is many custom settings. In fact, I see C1 to C6 on the custom dial here. So many custom settings to actually just configure your camera to how you want it to work, and pretty much it should work pretty well. Now, I won't talk too much about the menus and the operations because essentially it's the same as GFX100S. So pretty much, this is a modernized body, and of course it's using the later batteries, the newer batteries that you find, which I believe is called the, NPW235, the later batteries. And it also comes with dual card slots if you are worried, that maybe Fujifilm skimmed somewhere, but no, they didn't. They give dual card slots on this camera itself. Pretty much, as I said, GFX100S, but with a GFX50 sensor. Now, of course, this is just the physical part of things. So the thing is, what else has changed, compared to the GFX50S, which is like how many years old? Let me see, nearly 5 years old, compared to the GFX50S version 2. Now, I'll say as the sensor, firstly, the sensor isn't the same. There was 200 more pixels. I didn't notice when I was using the camera, so I couldn't just cheat. I just set the camera make to GFX50S and it reads the raw file. No, it doesn't work. So I went to check the EXIF itself. There's 200 more pixels on this sensor. The sensor it's probably a variant of the previous sensor, I would say. And then this sensor also has IBIS, so it has image stabilization, and it works down quite well, all the way, I would say, as to 1/6 of a shutter on a 45mm lens. By the way, the GF45mm lens here, it does work down to 1/6 of a shutter and gives me a keeper rate of about 40 to 50%, which, if you ask me, at 1/6 of a shutter for a 50 megapixel camera, very, very acceptable, because even my Sony A1 has massive problem doing that. So pretty much the image stabilization is great here. I believe the shutter mechanism also changed. The shutter is now very soft. Let me take a shot here and let you hear. And sorry, I need to remove this cap. Now, if you can hear the shutter now, this is the sound of the shutter. And just to note, just now what you heard was, I believe, the full mechanical. Let me check. So just now what you heard was the full mechanical shutter. I double verified it. And you can hear that the shutter is extremely dampened. This is similar to the 100S shutter. So they actually improved the shutter significantly on the 50S version 2. And all this helps in, stabilizing the camera. You can use it to 1/6 of the shutter with a 45mm GF lens, which is a 37mm equivalent, which is a pretty good performance if you ask me. At least it feels slightly better than even Sony's image stabilization on the A1. Quite on par with what I got from my RF 50mm. So good performance really for the GFX50S image stabilization. Now, the last thing that improved a lot is the responsiveness of the camera itself. Now, the camera is actually really, really responsive. It's exactly what you get in the GFX100S, GFX100, where you on it, it takes less than a second. You press play. Depending on your lens, I had a whole article on GF lens and how they affect your camera loading and boot up time. As long as you use a quick lens, the camera responds very fast. When you press play, it goes in the play menu in probably a sub-second. And then, you look around, you focus, it's also really quick. Now, maybe one of the things that you guys may ask is, how fast is the autofocus? I would say as the autofocus, better than the 50S definitely, but no, it's not on par with the GFX100. It is a contrast detect autofocus system, as you can see in this video here. So it has the contrast detect autofocus wobble, which means it will go to the end and then move forward, backward just to confirm focus itself. But that is not a bad thing, It does lock on, and it locks on really accurately. When I was doing my shoot, I never had issue with in terms of locking on to where I think is the eye, to get maximum contrast and to get the shot I want. So the contrast AF, I would say as on the GFX50S version 2 is improved significantly. Definitely better than the 50S itself, the original 50S, but don't expect the 50S version 2 to be as fast as the GFX100S or the GFX100 because it doesn't have face detect pixels, and it does wobble at the end of the focus itself. And I do not think there's any other thing that's different in this camera. Oh yes, so I did see online and some people were asking, now that this guy may have IBIS, then they were still rumoring whether there's IBIS or not. There is IBIS. So the question is, does it do multi-shot? And yes, it does. Let me show you this photo here, and you can see there is a multi-shot function. I have yet to try it because I couldn't read the raw photos here, so I'm not going to try it yet. And yes, you can do the pixel shift multi-shot, 1 second, 2 second, 5 second, 15 second interval. If not, you get the shortest interval on this camera itself. And then you just do the multi-shot itself. So it's a nice thing, the 50S version 2 if you ask me in a very short summary, is an updated version of the 50S original. But the 50S Mark II doesn't have face detect autofocus. That's the only thing it doesn't have. But other than that, it is a true upgrade in every single sense. It has faster autofocus because it's using the newer processor. It is better and more responsive, booting up in a second. It is easier and nicer to use, and it's also slightly lighter. And overall, if you ask me, a very more pleasant experience. It is so much more modernized. The only thing still is that the contrast detect AF means that tracking will not be really great. And the AF speed, especially in low light, does slow down significantly on the contrast detect AF system. And this camera is slated to sell at about $3,909 USD, according to the person that loaned me this camera, Fujifilm Singapore. They loaned me this camera itself. So pretty much a good value. I mean, 4,000 USD will translate to about 6,000 Sing dollars for a 50 megapixel camera. And by the way, this sensor I'm not really sure, this may be a variant of the 50 megapixel sensor. I'm guessing it is a variant, but it's not the exact same one. But that said, this sensor is still really, really good. It is really, really sharp. And based on my test last time, it is actually at a base ISO better than most modern high-resolution full-frame. Yes, it has 50 megapixels compared to other full-frame cameras, In fact, the A7 R4 has 62 megapixels. It has more megapixels. But the pixels here, I will tell you, is sharper, better. And, when you do especially shadow recovery in the most extreme sense, it is slightly better. It has less color tinting. It is more true to its original color source itself. So I don't worry about being an old sensor itself. In fact, without a face detect pixels, I would say as this camera, I would say as it will not have these bending problems and all the artifacts that normal face detect autofocus cameras will face, especially all the weird bending stuff that you see in like the original GFX100, which was fixed in the last firmware. Okay, pretty much this is just the GFX50S version 2. Now let's talk about the lens, 35 to 70 f4.5 to f5.6. Now this lens is a variable, I would say it's variable aperture lens, and it doesn't have as such focusing, I would say not focusing, aperture ring. It doesn't have an aperture ring. Now, without an aperture ring, which means that you have to set your aperture on the camera itself, not the deal breaker. How Fujifilm camera is configured is that you press the button here and you can change it. So no big deal on that. In fact, I do like it. I prefer to set my aperture on the camera these days than the lens because I have a tendency to knock it and then it goes some weird aperture number, which I don't want. So that said, there's no aperture ring and it's a variable aperture. It's a 4.5 to 5.6. Now, this lens is really, I would say, as close to what you see in a very affordable lens, which means it's a retracted lens and you must turn initially to 35 and then you hear the click. You hear a click and the lens extends and then you can use it. If you didn't do that, you will right there extend the lens itself. So once you do the initial extension, you can zoom in and zoom out. The zoom itself is pretty smooth. I would say it's not the smoothest. And I also noticed that as you smooth it, I think the camera is doing some compensation. Then you can feel the autofocus motor is just moving around. But yes, when you zoom in and out, it does move in and out. It's not the smoothest in the world, but it is relatively good still. And then there is the focusing ring in front, which I always say on a mirrorless camera makes no difference because, this is a focus by wire. It's just smooth all around, no hard stops and anything. Now, the lens do come with a hood, and when I borrowed it, it comes with this hood here. This hood is not the type that I like, which we have the locking mechanism. We have to press the button to unlock it. It doesn't, so it can spin out easily. So just to note, it's a petal hood, so just note that the orientation of the hood, if it gets loose halfway, it does cause vignetting. Now the lens optically, I would say as based on my initial test, pretty much okay. It looks like it's sharp, at least in the center and off center, and still relatively usable at even the near edges. I have yet to try it with my f4 lens. I'll compare it because it's quite rainy these days, so I only did a portrait shoot with it, which never goes all the way to the corner. But I can tell you, let me show you a few shots. Let's not waste time. It is very sharp. f5.6. Really, 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 really sharp. I mean, you really can see the combination of the GFX50S sensor, 50S version 2 sensor, and then the 35 to 70 is resolving at its max at f5.6. Ultra sharp lashes, ultra sharp hair, literally every blemish on the skin can be seen, which as such, whatever I show you today, the skin is definitely edited. The eyes, the lashes are as it is, the hair is as it is, but the skin is definitely edited because if not, the subject will be really unhappy with me. But yes, so overall, the lens, if you ask me, is a pretty good combination itself. Now, my understanding is that the lens costs quite a bit. I think should be still affordable. I remember it's less than $1,000 USD. I'm not too sure. I've forgotten the numbers. But if you can buy it as a package, this whole package of a GFX50S version 2 together with the lens, I remember I was told that it will be $4,500 USD, making this lens $500 USD if you buy as a package. So it's quite affordable if you buy as one. And if you ask me, if you are a studio shooter or you are a type that like to use flash with f5.6, definitely, get this lens because you're only going to lose one stop of, I would say as one stop compared to the 3264, but this is a 3570, which I find is a very usable range, especially the 70 side. And not only that, when you are using such a zoom and then using it for the purpose of doing studio shoot, you don't really care. f5.6 is definitely enough. So definitely a good lens to buy and start off. And as I said, center and off center is extremely sharp. f5.6 on this lens, really, really, really sharp. And this may not be the final copy. So the final copy, I do not know. Maybe slightly better. Maybe. Let's take a look at then when it comes up. That's about it for today. This is a preview of the GFX50S version 2 and the 35 to 70 f4.5 to f5.6 GF lens. Really, really brand new. Another thank Fujifilm Singapore for loaning me this lens here. And sorry if you see me sweating because I forgot on my aircon. So it's getting really hot here. But that's about it, It's the end of the day, and I will tell you that this combination is a modernized GFX50S. This is a 50S version 2. And if you are looking to buy a 50 megapixel medium format camera with image stabilization and feels responsive like a modern day camera, this camera is something that you really should consider. I mean, unless you need the autofocus, which I feel that even the GFX100 isn't that fantastic, in autofocus itself. I think the contrast detect AF will work out pretty much well if you just need a 50 megapixel sensor. This camera is something I truly recommend at 4,000 USD. Yes, it may not be as affordable as the A7 R4 today, which has 62. But I tell you that this 50 megapixel sensor is, if you ask me, in lower ISOs, definitely more usable than full frame sensors. That's my personal experience. It is definitely better than full frame sensor of equivalent megapixels, and you will definitely get photos that are so crisp that you will enjoy looking at them. But just a note, just one final closing statement. 50 megapixel sensors do suffer from moire, so just remember to fix your moire before you export it, because the moire can be quite destructive to some clothes. That's my personal experience when I was using the GFX50. And why do you get moire? Because the lens for the GFX system is really very good. They are super sharp. That's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to actually get a final preview, or should I say final production sample, because this is a pre-production sample, so may not be accurate. But when I get a final production sample, I'll do a follow-up review. Until then, I'll see you again. Bye-bye.